Hello, thank you for the presentations. My name is Zhe Fu, from PhD student from the economics department here at GW. So I have a question for Professor Li about the skill premium in China, since I'm also doing a work related to the skill premium. So I believe you found that the skill premium has increased since 2000 in China, right? But I'm not sure. Have you looked at the data prior 2000, like from late 1980s or the beginning of 1990s? Do you find, if you had, did you find the growth of the skill premium started since 2000 or started way earlier than 2000? Or do you find the growth rate of skill premium higher before the 2000 or higher after the 2000? So that's my question. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you for the question. So I'm not 100% sure, but I think that, so I remember that when I saw the data, this is just trend. So this started way before 2000, but the number that I showed here is isolating the effect of trade only. So and when we see the data, then the amount of increase of the skill premium in China is much larger in more recent periods. So when I say the recent periods is the time period that I consider in my paper, but it has been a little bit slowed in more recent periods, and that's because of the increased supply of education. So when you compare the time period before 2000 and after 2000, just before and after the cutoff, the amount of increase has been larger just after the cutoff. But if you look at more recent periods, then the trend has been slowed.
Yes, please. Where's the mic?
I'll ask a question, I guess. Stephen Smith, IIP Director and Economics Professor here at GW. A question for Professor Jia. I was reminded in your remarks, actually, about a presentation here at our 4th annual conference in 2011 by your co-author, Hongban Li. One of his many observations, if I recall correctly, had to do with specifically return on university education. And as I recall, he found that GPA had no effect, but that English proficiency had a significant effect. So obviously that's reminiscent of what you found, and I'm wondering whether your RD design might shed any light on mechanism here as well, namely to what extent, rather than being a kind of signaling English proficiency as sort of a real human capital skill, I guess the case for that could be that it opens up a world of information and knowledge to you that you might not have without that English. And I wonder if you have any thoughts on that based on your work. Thanks.
Thanks. So, yeah, if you look at the correlation with respect to the English score and the wage, you would find a positive correlation. In our story, the current story focus on this, whether you go to elite university make a difference. We don't find it make a difference in terms of your English test score in college. So we interpret this as we don't find evidence for human capital measured in this specific way. This does not mean that English score doesn't really matter. So does that answer your question?
It does. In addition to a kind of mechanical numerical score from a very set exam,
Yeah.
some subtleties to understanding and applying English. Maybe not all, but that's just a side.
Yeah. It's generally, if you're interested, I'm not an education person. I'm a political economy person thinking about this big institutional stuff. But if you're interested in China, indeed, English is a very interesting topic to think about how this affects labor market outcome. For this specific design, we want to understand whether you go to an elite university just because a few points above the cutoff, that makes you better in English. The answer is no.
All right, I'll try first. Sorry. I have a question for your Professor Jia, your college entrance cutoff score. So it's fascinating. The group that has slightly above the cutoff, clearly they end up in these top tier universities. That's not a question. But those who are slightly below the cutoff score may not end up in the next tier university. They may end up in nowhere, like a very low rank school, because when you apply, you don't know your score. You have to choose, right? You have to select. So that implies your result might be slightly exaggerating the change in the wage premium, if that is.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't have time to go. I see. That's very interesting. Actually, forgive me. I have another paper because the exam system has been used. Studied from China, but used a lot in other societies, especially in East Asia. It has many other interesting consequences. So I had a paper on the historical civil service exam, known as Keju, how that affects political stability. And then you can imagine it might affect other, people's character, which is difficult to study, but that's related to the channel. Why there could be a signaling mechanism in our story is the employers, when they try to employ people based on their CV, they are trying to infer not only their ability, but also their maybe how enduring they are when they go to the firms, for example. It's very challenging to really measure this. So if you think about a naive measure in our existing study, just to look at how hard they study in college, for example. But if you are interested in very different level, that's super interesting question. It's very difficult to have a convincing answer. For example, why I can imagine there's a curvature of effort. Like in high school, there's exam. In middle school, there's exam. What's funny or what's interesting in China is your effort maybe increasing from primary, middle, high school, and then suddenly you don't stop working in college, which is pretty interesting and different from the U.S. institution. And there's no such study. I guess it's just difficult to have really comparison. I study in primary school through working on homework, but that's maybe not really the type of effort you appreciate in college. So the answer is no. A short answer is no, but I think it's a super interesting question, especially thinking about the effort curvature in different education institutions. Yeah.
I am a retired professor at University of Maryland, and I have a question directed first to Professor Jia, or Dr. Shah, and then also to Dr. Li. The first one is this. Has there been any kind of comparative studies that have to do with Chinese or Asian students who are in China in comparison to Chinese students who are in the United States, and to see what kind of returns on their investments that they have made and what kind of outcomes occur for those students? For example, I would say that for Asian American and Asian students, they usually go to the top 200 schools in the United States. The general population goes to 8,000 different schools in the United States. It's a big difference. Yet the income returns of Asian students and Chinese students are not substantially higher than that of white male students. Not really. It's only about a 6% difference usually. When we're talking about this, I guess my question is, would there be some kind of factors that you are more knowledgeable about that might explain some of these conditions that are different in both of these countries? That's first. Yeah. So, Dr. Jia?
Oh, yeah. They're so interesting question. As economists, we are often binded by certain methodology or say, we want to give convincing result. Then it's difficult to answer this big picture question. But in general, I think you mentioned several things. I can imagine maybe for students here to work on the importance of social skills that kind of get emphasized here relatively less in China, that might be interesting, thinking about the importance of social skills. Another thing, maybe the labor market have discrimination. I don't know, but there could be some labor market discrimination with respect to your racial background or ethnical background. So this could be open questions to study. I don't have the answer, but I also think I didn't know that, the distribution of college education. This sounds like a great topic for some graduate students to work on here.
Thank you very much. The second question, Dr. Lee, is that your study seems to collaborate a lot of the arguments of Bernie Sanders and also Trump, honestly. And it does seem that inequality has risen, although income generally has risen, right, in your study. What consequences do you think, from a public policy point of view, would be some of the recommendations that you would give, for example, for the Trump presidency as it relates to, let's say, the issues that you've been discussing so far? Yeah.
Thank you very much. I remember I briefly mentioned that at the end of my talk. So yes, it's true. So trade increases inequality, especially in the U.S. But what I didn't show today, in the interest of time, is that if we have more flexible labor markets where workers can adjust to new industries and new occupations more easily, then I can show that within the same framework, trade increases inequality less or has negligible effect on inequality. And then I can also show that if we have upgrading of their educational level, if I endogenize their educational choice in this model, then I can also show that trade has negligible effect on inequality or even decrease inequality across different worker types. And lastly, I can also show that if we design a new policy which helps which help lower skilled workers to have better skilled occupations compared to the previous occupation that they have, then we can also show that trade has negligible effect or even decrease inequality across different worker groups. So that would be my recommendation for the new president-elect.
That's a very difficult task.
Of course, yes.
Running out of questions, so we're finished with our session. Thank you very much.
To details, it depends. You have this perception partly maybe because you studied from Beijing. I guess there's many interesting regional variation in Beijing and Shanghai. You applied to the university before you know the exam, but for all the other provinces, you know your exam score and the cutoff, and you apply. So that's why most of, I guess for some students that could happen, but for the majority of students, if they are below the cutoff, they still end up in some second-tier university. That's for the majority of the cases. But if you're interested in mechanism design, for example, this is another interesting case to study, this regional variation. There are 3 types of recruitment if you're interested. Beijing and Shanghai, you applied before you took the exam. For a few provinces, you applied after you took exam, but before you know your score. But for the majority of provinces, you apply after you took the exam and after you know your score. So that's why for another reason, we want to compare just within province, because there's such an interesting but challenging comparison across provinces. But for short answer is for the majority of cases, that seems not to be critical.
Okay. Can I make another comment to Professor Lee? It's interesting that you're finding that there's gains across the group after you reduce the trade cost, like different skill level within education group, between education group, they all have, seems all gained after the trade cost is cut down. It's like inequality rises, but they all have higher wages. It's consistent with what we saw in the morning. Michael Plummer had a similar slide, and he used the Mallet's model, you use the EK model, And it seems very interesting and fascinating that this type of models are so different from Stoper-Samuelson or that sort of thing. There's winners and losers in international trade. What exactly is the mechanism that drives this result? That's puzzling. I'm not sure.
Let me clarify the first one. I went very quickly, so not everyone gains from trade in absolute terms. So some people lose in absolute terms. So it is not that different from Stoper-Samuelson prediction in that sense. And also, even though I have EK model in this paper, there is Stoper-Samuelson effect because this is just not one industry EK model, but this is multi-industry EK model. And I allow different skill intensity across different industries, and I also allow different factor supplies across different industries. So at the industrial level, there is Stoper-Samuelson effect, but within industry, there is EK effect. So I would say this is still has some Stoper-Samuelson flavor, as you expected.
My name is Li Yang. I try to compare the different world within China and the Cultural Revolution and United States and Taiwan. Your Gaokao is a little bit like unified exam. Taiwan is go to from elementary school to high school, something of this sort. The real Gaokao in Taiwan is a high exam or special exam just after the college graduation. So there we see a different kind of endurance, not just the sport itself. And then the Cultural Revolution in China, I think it's totally abolished the character building. So I just want to have a real career and a good reputation of your career path. Whether is there any study of this sort, the real exam compared to the lower level exam in elementary school, that type of things, compared to the high or college graduates or even post-college graduates, maybe post-doctorate. In America, you have SAT, PSAT, then you have GRE, and so on and so on. So that will really reflect their endurance and really their persistence